Midnight, the hour when the world holds its breath, and the shadows grow long enough to swallow a man whole. Along a forgotten country lane, beneath a sky bruised with storm clouds, a lone figure approaches the gates of Ashford Manor. The ironwork is twisted, blackened by time and neglect, and the wind carries with it a chorus of whispers. Some say the voices of the damned, others, the secrets of the Ashford family themselves. For centuries, the manor has stood as a monument to both grandeur and decay, its windows staring blankly into the night like the eyes of a corpse. Locals cross themselves when they pass by, children dare each other to touch the crumbling stone, and no one lingers after dark. They say the Ashfords were cursed, that madness and misfortune clung to their bloodline, like ivy to the manor's walls. There are tales of disappearances, of strange lights flickering in the upper rooms, of laughter echoing through empty halls long after the last guest had fled. Some believe the family dabbled in things best left undisturbed: occult rituals, forbidden science, the kind of knowledge that stains the soul. Others whisper of a single, unspeakable act that doomed them all, a secret so terrible it was buried with the last Ashford, never to be spoken aloud. Tonight, as the visitor's footsteps crunch across the gravel, the manor seems to lean closer, eager to share its story. What really happened within these walls? What secret did the last Ashford take to their grave? If you're brave enough, stay with me. The truth is waiting, and it's far darker than you can imagine. Ashford Manor rises from the tangled heart of the English countryside, its silhouette etched against the restless sky like a wound that refuses to heal. Once, it was the pride of the county, a sprawling estate of honeyed stone and soaring gables, its gardens a riot of color and fragrance, its halls alive with music and laughter. In the golden light of late afternoon, the manor would glow, its windows catching the sun and scattering it across the lawns, where children in white linen played beneath the watchful gaze of marble statues. The Ashfords hosted grand balls that drew the region's elite, their carriages lining the drive, their laughter spilling out into the night. Servants bustled through the corridors, silver gleamed on the tables, and the air was thick with the scent of roses and ambition. But that was another lifetime. Now, the manor is a mausoleum of memories, its beauty rotted from within. The gardens are choked with nettles and brambles, the once proud fountains dry and cracked, their stone nymphs weeping moss. The great oaks that once shaded picnics now claw at the sky, their branches gnarled and skeletal. The windows, once polished to a mirror shine, are clouded with grime, their panes fractured like old bones. The roof sags under the weight of years, and the chimneys lean at drunken angles, as if the house itself is weary of its own secrets. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of mildew and regret. Wallpaper peels in long, curling strips, revealing scars of damp and decay. The grand staircase, once the stage for countless entrances and exits, groans underfoot, its banister polished smooth by generations of anxious hands. Portraits of the Ashford ancestors line the walls, their painted eyes following every movement, their expressions frozen somewhere between pride and accusation. In the drawing room, a grand piano sits silent, its keys yellowed and warped, the last note played long ago. Dust motes swirl in the slanting light, disturbed only by the occasional scurrying of unseen creatures. The village that once depended on the Ashfords has shrunk to a handful of cottages, their inhabitants wary and tight-lipped. They speak of the manor in hushed tones, as if the very name might summon something best left undisturbed. Children are warned not to stray too close, especially after sunset, when the mist creeps in from the moors and the boundaries between worlds grow thin. Some say they've seen lights flickering in the upper windows, or heard the strains of a phantom waltz drifting across the fields. Others claim to have glimpsed a pale figure at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting. The legends are as thick as the fog that clings to the estate. There are stories of a hidden room, sealed off after a night of unspeakable violence, of a blood-stained diary, its pages filled with desperate confessions, of a curse uttered by a dying woman, her voice echoing through the halls long after her body was laid to rest. Some believe the Ashfords made a pact with something ancient and hungry, trading their souls for wealth and power. Others insist the family was simply unlucky. Their tragedies, the result of pride and poor choices, magnified by the relentless gaze of a community eager for scandal. Yet, for all the rumors, no one truly knows what happened within these walls. The truth is tangled with myth, each generation adding its own embellishments, its own fears. The manor stands as both a warning and a temptation, a place where the past refuses to die, and the shadows are never empty. As the wind rattles the shutters and the night deepens, one question lingers. What darkness took root here, and why does it still linger, long after the last Ashford has gone? The Ashford name was not always spoken with dread. In the beginning, it was little more than a footnote in the annals of rural England, a family of modest means, their fortunes tied to the fickle rhythms of the land. The first to bear the Ashford crest was Elias Ashford, a tenant farmer with a shrewd mind and a hunger that outstripped his station. In the waning years of the 17th century, Elias seized an opportunity that would change the family's fate forever. A neighboring estate, ruined by debt and disease, was sold for a pittance. Elias bought it, and with it, the first stones of what would become Ashford Manor. Elias was a man of vision, but also of secrets. He married above his station, a merchant's daughter with a dowry as substantial as her pride. Together, they transformed the estate, draining the marshes, planting orchards, and building the first wing of the manor. Their children were raised to believe in the sanctity of ambition, the necessity of sacrifice. The Ashfords, Elias insisted, were destined for greatness, and greatness demanded a certain ruthlessness. It was Elias's son, Jonathan Ashford, who first tasted true power. Jonathan was a magistrate, a man of law and order, but his justice was often swift and merciless. He expanded the estate, acquiring land through shrewd deals and, some whispered, through intimidation and blackmail. Under his rule, the Ashfords became the region's undisputed lords, their influence stretching from the village to the county seat. Jonathan's portrait still hangs in the manor's great hall, his eyes cold and calculating, his lips pressed into a thin, unsmiling line. With each generation, the Ashfords climbed higher, their ambitions growing ever more grandiose. There was Margaret Ashford, the so-called Iron Rose, who outlived 3 husbands and doubled the family's holdings through a combination of charm and cunning. Her letters, preserved in the manor's archives, reveal a mind as sharp as any blade and a heart hardened by loss. She wrote of dreams that haunted her, visions of blood and fire, of voices whispering in the dark. Some say it was Margaret who first spoke of the Ashford curse, a shadow that clung to the family no matter how high they rose. Then came Edward Ashford, the industrialist, who dragged the family into the modern age. He built factories, invested in railways, and turned the manor into a symbol of progress. But Edward's success was built on the backs of the desperate child laborers, exploited tenants, and rivals ruined by his relentless drive. The village prospered, but at a cost. Strikes and protests were met with violence, and more than one body was found floating in the river. The circumstances always suspicious, the investigations always inconclusive. It was during Edward's reign that the first cracks began to show. His eldest son, Henry, was found dead in the library, a bottle of laudanum at his side, and a letter filled with rambling, paranoid accusations. The family hushed it up, blaming illness, but the servants whispered of strange rituals and midnight gatherings. Edward's wife, Lillian, withdrew from society, her health failing, her mind unraveling. She was often seen wandering the gardens at dusk, muttering to herself, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. The Ashfords' rise was marked by triumph, but also by tragedy. For every new wing added to the manor, there was a scandal buried in the foundations. For every marriage alliance, a betrayal. For every child born, a shadow cast. The family's motto, "Fortune favors the bold," was carved above the entrance. But beneath it, in a hand almost too faint to see, someone had scratched another word: doomed. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Ashfords were both revered and reviled. Their wealth was undeniable, their influence unmatched. But their reputation was stained by rumors of madness, cruelty, and worse. The villagers spoke of a curse, passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, darkness that grew with each generation, fed by ambition and secrecy. Some believed the Ashfords had made a pact with forces beyond comprehension, trading their souls for power. Others saw only the inevitable rot that comes from unchecked privilege and pride. Yet, for all their flaws, the Ashfords were human, driven by love, fear, hope, and desperation. Their story is not just one of evil, but of the choices that shape a family, and the price paid for reaching too high. As the years passed, the line thinned, the manor decayed, and the curse reel, or imagined, tightened its grip. The stage was set for the tragedies to come, and the whispers in the walls grew louder, waiting for someone to listen. It was the summer of 1812 when the first true shadow fell across Ashford Manor, a year that began with promise and ended in whispers. The estate was alive with preparations for the annual midsummer fete, a tradition that drew guests from miles around. Lanterns hung from the ancient oaks, the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and anticipation, and the Ashfords, resplendent in their finery, presided over the festivities with practiced grace. Among the guests that year was a young woman named Clara Whitby, a distant cousin on the Ashford side, newly arrived from London. Clara was 17, with a laugh that could turn heads and a curiosity that often led her into trouble. She was seen everywhere that week, dancing on the lawn, exploring the rose gardens, her white dress trailing through the dew. Servants gossiped about her beauty, her wit, and the way she seemed to charm even the most reserved of the Ashfords. But beneath the surface, there were tensions. Clara's presence unsettled some of the family, particularly Henry Ashford, the heir apparent, whose attentions toward her grew increasingly possessive. There were arguments behind closed doors, sharp words exchanged in the corridors, and more. Then one guest remarked on the strained smiles at the dinner table. The night of the fete arrived, and with it, a sense of unease. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air electric. As the guests danced and drank, Clara slipped away from the crowd, drawn by the promise of adventurer, perhaps by something darker. She was last seen near the edge of the woods, her laughter echoing through the trees. Some say she was accompanied by a shadowy figure, others insist she was alone. What is certain is that, by morning, Clara Whitby had vanished without a trace. The search began at dawn. Servants scoured the grounds, calling her name until their voices were hoarse. The woods were combed, the river dragged, every outbuilding and cellar inspected. All they found was a single white slipper, abandoned in the mud near the old well, and a torn scrap of lace caught on a thorn. The family insisted Clara had simply wandered off, perhaps overcome by the excitement of the night, but the villagers were not so easily convinced. Rumors spread like wildfire of secret lovers, jealous rages, and ancient curses awakened by innocent blood. The Ashfords closed ranks, forbidding any mention of Clara's disappearance. Her belongings were quietly packed away, her name struck from the guest lists, her portrait removed from the drawing room. But the servants remembered. They spoke of strange noises in the night, the sound of weeping from the empty guest room, footsteps pacing the halls, doors that slammed without warning. Some claimed to have seen Clara's ghost, her white dress glowing in the moonlight as she wandered the gardens, searching for something she would never find. The scandal rocked the county. The Ashfords' reputation, once unassailable, was now tainted by suspicion. Henry Ashford grew withdrawn, his health failing, his temper fraying at the edges. He was often seen standing by the old well, staring into its depths as if hoping for a sign. His mother, Lady Margaret, took to her bed, refusing visitors and shrouding herself in black. The fete was never held again. Years passed, but the questions remained. What really happened to Clara Whitby that night? Was she the victim of a crime of passion, a casualty of the Ashford curse? Or did she simply run away, seeking freedom from a family that saw her as little more than a pawn? Theories abounded. Some believed she had discovered a secret too dangerous to keep and paid the price for her curiosity. Others whispered that she had been sacrificed in a ritual, her blood sealing the family's pact with darkness. A few clung to the hope that she had survived, living under a new name, her silence, bought with gold or fear. The truth, if it ever existed, was buried beneath layers of lies and silence. The Ashfords moved on, but the stain of that summer never faded. The manor itself seemed to mourn, its walls growing colder, its halls more echoing. The villagers avoided the estate, and children dared each other to find the spot where Clara's slipper was found, convinced that her spirit lingered there, waiting for justice. And so, the first scandal of Ashford Manor became legend, a cautionary tale, whispered by firelight, a mystery that refused to die. Even now, if you stand by the old well on a moonless night, you might hear the faintest echo of laughter, or catch a glimpse of white among the shadows. What really happened that night? Was it the beginning of the Ashford curse, or simply the inevitable result of ambition, jealousy, and secrets too heavy to bear? The answer remains lost to time, a riddle that haunts the manor still. In the years that followed Clara Whitby's disappearance, Ashford Manor became a house divided, its facade of gentility growing ever more brittle. Even as the rot beneath the surface spread, the Ashfords clung to their rituals of respectability, Sunday services in the family pew, charity galas in the ballroom, polite smiles for the village. But behind closed doors, the family was unraveling, each generation more haunted than the last. It began with Henry Ashford, the heir who had once been the pride of his parents. After Clara's vanishing, Henry was never the same. He grew gaunt and restless, plagued by nightmares that left him pacing the halls at all hours. Servants whispered of his fits, violent outbursts, followed by days of catatonic silence. He took to locking himself in the library, poring over ancient tomes and scribbling frantic notes in the margins. Some nights, he would be found in the gardens, barefoot and shivering, muttering to the shadows. The family doctor diagnosed melancholia, but the villagers spoke of possession, of a mind cracked open by guilt and grief. Henry's decline was mirrored by his younger sister, Beatrice, whose beauty and charm had once been the talk of the county. Beatrice became withdrawn, her laughter replaced by a brittle, nervous giggle. She was seen speaking to herself in empty rooms, her hands fluttering like trapped birds. One winter's night, she vanished from her bed, only to be found hours later at the edge of the frozen lake, her nightgown soaked and her lips blue. She never spoke of what had drawn her there, but from that night on, she refused to sleep with the lights off, insisting that something waited for her in the dark. The next generation fared no better. Edward Ashford, Henry's son, inherited the manor and the family's burdens. Outwardly, Edward was the model of Victorian propriety, a magistrate, a patron of the arts, a loving husband and father. But those who knew him best saw the cracks. Edward was a man of appetites, his charm masking a cold, calculating cruelty. He ruled the estate with an iron fist, dismissing servants for the slightest infraction, driving tenants from their homes with little warning. There were rumors of affairs, of secret rooms and locked doors, of screams muffled by thick stone walls. Some said Edward kept a ledger of every slight, every insult, and that he took pleasure in settling old scores. His wife Eleanor suffered in silence. She was rarely seen in public, her health a constant source of speculation. When she did appear, she was pale and thin, her eyes ringed with shadows. The servants pitied her, but none dared intervene. It was said that Eleanor spent her days wandering the manor, tracing the same path over and over, as if searching for a way out. Her only solace was her children, but even they were not spared the family's curse. Their eldest daughter, Lillian, was sent away to a sanatorium at 16, her mind fractured by terrors she could not name. The younger son, Thomas, grew up wild and reckless, his escapades the subject of endless gossip. Yet, for all their suffering, the Ashfords maintained their grip on the community. They donated to the church, sponsored the village school, and hosted elaborate fetes, though never again the midsummer celebration. The villagers accepted their charity, but never their friendship. They saw the bruises on the servants' arms, heard the muffled sobs behind closed doors, and watched as the family's carriages rolled through the village, their curtains drawn tight. The Ashfords were both benefactors and tyrants, their generosity laced with menace. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred with each passing year. Henry, once a golden boy, became a ghost in his own home, his madness both a punishment and a shield. Beatrice, broken by fear, lashed out at those closest to her, her cruelty a mirror of her own pain. Edward, driven by ambition and haunted by the failures of his forebears, became the architect of his family's misery, unable or unwilling to break the cycle. Even Eleanor, trapped by circumstance and tradition, found herself complicit in the family's decline, her silence a form of survival. The manor itself seemed to feed on their suffering. Doors slammed without warning, mirrors cracked for no reason, and the air grew heavy with the scent of decay. Servants came and went, few lasting more than a season. Some claimed to have seen figures moving in the shadows, or heard voices whispering their names. The bravest among them left offerings at the old well coins, flowers, scraps of bread, and the hope of appeasing whatever restless spirit lingered there. As the years wore on, the Ashfords became prisoners of their own legacy. The world outside changed, wars were fought, empires rose and fell, but within the manor, time seemed to stand still. The same arguments echoed through the halls, the same secrets festered in the dark. The family's decline was both public and private, a spectacle for the village and a torment for those within. The Ashfords had built their fortune on ambition and ruthlessness, but it was madness and malice that would define their end. And yet, even in their darkest moments, there were flashes of humanity: mother's desperate love, a brother's futile attempt to save his sister, a daughter's longing for freedom. The Ashfords were not monsters, but people broken by the weight of their own history. Their story is a warning, a reminder that evil is rarely born, but made, shaped by fear, by pride, by the choices we make and the secrets we keep. As the manor crumbled and the family dwindled, one question remained: was the Ashford curse real, or simply the inevitable result of generations of pain left to fester in the shadows? By the late 19th century, the Ashford family's reputation for eccentricity had curdled into something far more sinister. The world was changing. Electric light flickered in the cities, steam trains thundered across the countryside, and the boundaries of knowledge seemed to expand with every passing year. Yet within the crumbling walls of Ashford Manor, the family's obsessions took a darker turn, blurring the line between scientific inquiry and the occult. It was a time when the rationale and the supernatural coexisted uneasily, and the Ashfords, ever hungry for power and answers, were determined to master both. The architect of this new era was Dr. Percival Ashford, a distant cousin who arrived at the manor in 1883, bringing with him a trunk full of medical instruments, a library of forbidden texts, and a reputation that preceded him. Percival was a man of contradictions, a physician trained at Oxford, yet fascinated by alchemy and mesmerism. A skeptic in public, but a believer in private. He spoke of progress and enlightenment, but his eyes betrayed a feverish intensity that unsettled even his own kin. Under Percival's influence, the manor became a laboratory of secrets. The old wine cellar was converted into a workshop, its walls lined with jars of preserved specimens and shelves of ancient tomes. Servants were forbidden to enter, and those who did reported strange smells: ozone, burning herbs, the coppery tints of blood. At night, flickering candlelight could be seen through the cracks in the floorboards, and the air was thick with the hum of arcane machinery. Percival's experiments were the stuff of legend. He dabbled in phrenology, convinced that the shape of the skull could reveal the secrets of the soul. He conducted seances in the drawing room, inviting mediums and spiritualists to commune with the dead. He collected rare plants from the far corners of the empire, searching for elixirs that might cure madness or grant vision. Some said he kept a ledger of dreams, recording the nightmares of every family member in the hope of deciphering a pattern of code that might explain the Ashford curse. But it was his work with the mind that drew the most suspicion. Percival believed that the human psyche was a frontier as vast and unexplored as any jungle, and he was determined to map its darkest corners. He subjected his own children to a series of psychological tests, sensory deprivation, hypnotic suggestion, even isolation in the Manor's attic for days at a time. The results were meticulously documented, but the cost was high. His eldest daughter, Alice, emerged from these trials a changed creature, her once bright eyes now dull, her laughter replaced by a low, unsettling hum. She spoke in riddles, claimed to see things that weren't there, and spent hours staring at the walls, tracing invisible patterns with her fingers. The villagers, already wary of the Ashfords, began to whisper of black magic. They spoke of strange symbols carved into the trees at the edge of the estate, of animals found mutilated in the woods, of children who returned from the manor with wild stories and haunted eyes. Some believed Percival had made a pact with something unholy, trading the sanity of his family for forbidden knowledge. Others insisted he was simply mad, a victim of his own hubris. Yet, for all the fear and suspicion, there was a method to Percival's madness. He was driven by a single, terrible question. Could the Ashford curse be broken or harnessed? Was the darkness that haunted his bloodline a supernatural affliction or a disease of the mind? He sought answers in every corner of the known and unknown world, consulting with scientists, mystics, and charlatans alike. He corresponded with the great minds of his age, Freud, Charcot, even the notorious Aleister Crowley, seeking insight into the nature of evil, the mechanics of fate. The manor became a crossroads of the strange and the scholarly. On any given night, one might find a séance in the parlor, a dissection in the cellar, and a heated debate on the nature of the soul in the library. The Ashfords played host to a parade of eccentrics, mediums who claimed to channel the spirits of the dead, inventors with machines that promised to photograph the aura, doctors who believed madness could be cured with electricity. The boundaries between science and superstition blurred, and the family's grip on reality grew ever more tenuous. It was during this period that the most infamous of the Ashford experiments took place, a series of rituals and trials known only as the Red Sessions. The details are shrouded in rumor and half-truths, but fragments of Percival's journals suggest a desperate attempt to summon, bind, or perhaps exorcise the force that haunted the family. The sessions involved bloodletting, chanting in forgotten tongues, and the use of rare, poisonous herbs. Participants reported visions of shadowy figures, voices that spoke in riddles, and a sense of overwhelming dread. One servant, who stumbled upon a session by accident, was found days later wandering the moors, her mind shattered, her tongue swollen and black. The aftermath of the Red Sessions was catastrophic. Several family members fell ill, plagued by hallucinations and violent rages. The manor itself seemed to rebel, doors jammed, windows shattered, and the very walls groaned as if in pain. Percival retreated further into his work, convinced he was on the verge of a breakthrough. But whatever he hoped to create or unleash remains a mystery. His notes end abruptly. The final entry, a single, chilling line. The door is open, but what has come through? In the years that followed, the Ashford family's decline accelerated. The experiments were hushed up, the cellar sealed, and Percival himself vanished. Some say he fled the country, others that he was consumed by his own creation. The villagers avoided the manor altogether, and the family's name became synonymous with madness and blasphemy. Yet the questions lingered, gnawing at the edges of memory and myth. Was Percival a visionary, a madman, or something far worse? Did he glimpse a truth too terrible to bear, or did he simply lose himself in the labyrinth of his own mind? What did the Ashfords hope to create or unleash? Was it salvation or damnation? The answer, like so much else in their history, remains locked behind the whispering walls of Ashford Manor, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to seek it out. If you were in their place, would you have dared to look beyond the veil? Or would you have turned away, content to let the darkness slumber undisturbed? The choice, as always, is yours. There are nights that become legend, nights when the world seems to tilt on its axis and nothing is ever the same again. For the Ashford family, that night came in the autumn of 1897, when the moon rose blood-red over the manor and the air itself seemed to tremble with anticipation. It was a night that would be whispered about for generations, a night of terror, revelation, and irrevocable loss. The omens began days before. The dogs refused to enter the house, howling at the gates until their voices gave out. The clocks stopped at midnight, no matter how many times they were wound. Servants reported cold spots in the halls, and the youngest Ashford, little Samuel, woke screaming from dreams of fire and shadows. The villagers, already wary of the family's reputation, crossed themselves and locked their doors, refusing to set foot on Ashford land after dusk. Inside the manor, the atmosphere was electric with dread. Percival Ashford, gaunt and wild-eyed, had summoned the family for a gathering he called a reckoning. He spoke of the curse, of the darkness that had haunted their bloodline for centuries, and of a ritual that would either break their chains or doom them forever. Some believed him mad, others desperate, but none could deny the sense of inevitability that hung over the house like a shroud. The family assembled in the great hall, the air thick with the scent of burning herbs and candle wax. The windows were draped in black, and the only light came from a ring of candles arranged in a pattern no one recognized. Percival stood at the center, his voice trembling as he recited words in a language older than the stones beneath their feet. The others, Edward, Eleanor, Beatrice, and the children, formed a circle around him, their faces pale and drawn. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters and sending leaves skittering across the courtyard. The moon, swollen and red, hung low in the sky, casting the manor in a sickly, otherworldly glow. As the ritual began, the temperature dropped, and the flames of the candles flickered, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. Percival's voice rose, urgent and pleading, as he called upon whatever force haunted the Ashfords to reveal itself. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of centuries of secrets. The family joined hands, their knuckles white, their breaths shallow. For a moment, nothing happened, just a crackle of the fire and the distant sound of thunder. Then, the room seemed to shift, the walls pulsed, as if alive, and a low guttural moan echoed through the manor. The candles flared, their flames stretching toward the ceiling, and the shadows on the walls began to move of their own accord. The air was filled with whispers, fragments of old arguments, cries of pain, laughter twisted into screams. The Ash clung to each other, terror etched into their faces. Suddenly, the great doors slammed shut, and the temperature plummeted. The circle was broken as Beatrice collapsed, writhing on the floor, her eyes rolling back in her head. Percival rushed to her side, but was thrown back by an invisible force. The others tried to flee, but found the doors locked, the windows unbreakable. Panic set in as the whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single, inhuman voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You have called, and I have come," it intoned, the words vibrating in their bones. "Blood for blood, sign for sign. The debt must be paid." The room erupted into chaos. Edward tried to shield his wife and children, but was dragged away by unseen hands. Eleanor screamed, her voice echoing through the halls, as the shadows closed in around her. Percival, desperate, began to recite the ritual in reverse, hoping to undo what he had unleashed. But the force was too strong, feeding on their fear, their guilt, their centuries of secrets. In the midst of the chaos, little Samuel broke free from his mother's grasp and ran to the center of the circle. He knelt beside Beatrice, who was now eerily still, her lips moving in silent prayer. Samuel looked up at the red moon, his eyes wide with terror and wonder. For a moment, the room fell silent, the shadows retreating as if in deference to the child's innocence. Then, with a sound like the tearing of fabric, the great hall was plunged into darkness. The candles were snuffed out, and the only light came from the blood-red moon, shining through a crack in the curtains. The family was scattered, each trapped in their own private nightmare visions of past sins, lost loves, and the faces of those they had wronged. The manor itself seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, the walls closing in, the floor buckling beneath their feet. When the sun finally rose, the villagers found the manor eerily silent. The great doors stood open, and the air was heavy with the scent of smoke and something far older. Inside, the scene was one of devastation. The great hall was in ruins, the walls scorched, the floorboards splintered. Of the family, only a handful remained: Percival, broken and raving, his hair turned white overnight; Eleanor, catatonic, her eyes fixed on something only she could see; and Samuel, silent and unmoving, clutching a scrap of Beatrice's dress. The others were gone, banished without a trace, their fates a mystery that would haunt the village for generations. Some said they had been taken by the force Percival had summoned, their souls claimed as payment for the family's sins. Others believed they had simply fled, driven mad by the horrors they had witnessed. The truth, as always, was more complicated, a tapestry of guilt, grief, and the terrible weight of history. The night of the red moon became the defining moment in the Ashford legend, a night when the boundaries between worlds were shattered, and the family paid the price for centuries of ambition, cruelty, and secrets. The manor never recovered. Its halls grew colder, its shadows deeper, and the whispers in the walls grew louder, as if the house itself mourned the loss of its inhabitants. What really happened that night? Was it madness, mass hysteria, or something truly supernatural? The villagers still debate the question, their stories growing wilder with each retelling. But one thing is certain: the Ashfords were never seen in the same light again. The curse, whether real or imagined, had claimed its due, and the manor stood as a monument to the dangers of seeking answers best left unasked. If you listen closely, on nights when the moon is red and the wind howls through the trees, you might still hear the echoes of that terrible night, the cries, the laughter, the whispered promises of a debt finally paid. When the sun rose over Ashford Manor, the morning after the night of the red moon, it revealed a landscape forever changed. The once proud estate was a shell of its former self, its grandeur reduced to a haunted ruin. The great hall, where generations of Ashfords had celebrated triumphs and mourned losses, was now a charred, splintered wasteland. The gardens, once meticulously tended, had become a tangle of weeds and thorns, as if nature itself sought to reclaim what the family had stolen from it. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and something older, something that clung to the stones and would not be washed away. The villagers, drawn by curiosity and dread, gathered at the gates but dared not cross the threshold. They whispered of what they saw: the shattered windows, the scorched earth, the eerie silence that hung over the manor like a funeral shroud. Some claimed to see figures moving behind the curtains, pale faces peering out with hollow eyes. Others insisted the house was empty, abandoned by both the living and the dead. The truth was somewhere in between. Of the Ashford family, only a handful remained. Percival, once the architect of the family's ambitions, was found wandering the grounds, his mind shattered beyond repair. He spoke in riddles, his hair turned white, his eyes haunted by visions no one else could see. He was taken away to an asylum, where he spent his remaining days scribbling symbols on the walls and muttering about doors that should never have been opened. Eleanor, his sister-in-law, was discovered in the nursery, rocking an empty cradle and singing lullabies to children long gone. She never spoke again, her mind lost in a labyrinth of grief and terror. Samuel, the youngest, survived in body but not in spirit. He was found clutching a scrap of Beatrice's dress, his eyes wide and unblinking. He never uttered another word, and as he grew older, he became a ghost in his own right, drifting through the village in silence, a living reminder of the family's fall. The others had Ward, Beatrice, and the rest were simply gone. No bodies were ever found, no graves dug. Some believed they had fled into the night, driven mad by what they had witnessed. Others whispered that they had been claimed by the very force Percival had summoned, their souls lost to the darkness that had haunted the family for generations. The manor itself became a place of fear and fascination. Children dared each other to touch its crumbling walls, to peer through its broken windows. Teenagers crept inside on moonless nights, hoping to catch a glimpse of a ghost or hear the whispers that were said to echo through the halls. Some returned with wild stories of cold hands grabbing at their ankles, of voices calling their names, of shadows that moved against the laws of nature. Others returned changed, quieter, their eyes shadowed by things they could not explain. The village, too, bore the scars of the Ashford legacy. For years, the community struggled to shake off the shadow cast by the manor. Marriages failed, crops withered, and a sense of unease lingered in the air. Some families moved away, seeking a fresh start, far from the cursed estate. Those who remained learned to live with the stories, weaving them into the fabric of their lives. The Ashfords became a cautionary tale, a warning whispered to children who strayed too far after dark. Don't go near the manor, or the curse will follow you home. Yet, even as the years passed and the manor crumbled, the memory of the Ashfords refused to die. Their portraits, salvaged from the ruins, hung in the village church, their eyes following parishioners with silent accusation. Their names lingered in the parish records, a roll call of ambition, madness, and loss. The land itself seemed to remember, the grass growing in strange patterns, the trees bending away from the house as if recoiling from some unseen horror. For the survivors, the psychological scars ran deep. Those who had served the family spoke of nightmares that never faded, of guilt and fear that gnawed at them in the quiet hours before dawn. Some found solace in faith, others in drink, but none could escape the feeling that they had been touched by something beyond understanding. The Ashford legacy was not just a story of ruin, but of wounds that would never fully heal. And so, the question lingers, as persistent as the whispers in the manor's empty halls. Would you have survived the Ashford legacy? Could you have withstood the weight of secrets, the pull of ambition, the lure of forbidden knowledge? Or would you, too, have been consumed by the darkness that claimed them all? The answer, perhaps, lies not in the ruins of Ashford Manor, but in the shadows we each carry within ourselves. Time has not dulled the mysteries of Ashford Manor. If anything, the decades have only deepened the shadows, inviting new generations to peer into the darkness and wonder what truly happened within those crumbling walls. The official records are sparse death certificates with vague causes, missing persons reports that trail off into silence, medical notes filled with euphemisms for madness. But the gaps in the story have become fertile ground for speculation, and the Ashford legend has grown into a labyrinth of theories, each more tantalizing than the last. Some believe the answer lies in the supernatural. They point to the night of the red moon, to the stories of doors slamming on their own, of voices whispering in empty rooms, of the air growing cold and heavy with dread. Paranormal investigators have visited the manor, their equipment crackling with static, their cameras capturing fleeting shapes and inexplicable lights. A few claim to have recorded voices' pleas for help, warnings to leave, or simply the echo of a name. Clara, Beatrice, Samuel. Was the Ashford curse a real, malevolent force, or the collective trauma of a family unraveling under the weight of its own secrets? Others insist the truth is more earthly, if no less disturbing. They see the Ashfords as victims of their own ambition and isolation, undone by generations of unchecked power and psychological torment. Modern psychologists have pored over the family's letters and journals, diagnosing everything from hereditary schizophrenia to mass hysteria. Some suggest that Percival's experiments his use of hallucinogenic herbs. His obsession with the occult may have triggered a shared psychosis, a spiral of fear and suggestion that ended in tragedy. Was the night of the red moon a supernatural reckoning, or a night of collective madness, fueled by guilt and desperation? There are even those who believe the Ashford story is a cover for something more mundane, but no less sinister. Conspiracy theorists whisper of hidden rooms and secret passages, of bodies buried in the woods, of a family willing to do anything to protect its reputation. They point to the missing records, the sudden disappearances, the way the village closed ranks around the manor. Did the Ashfords hide a crime so terrible that it could never be spoken aloud? Or did the community itself conspire to erase the truth, turning the family into scapegoats for its own fears? Despite decades of investigation, The manor keeps its secrets. Every attempt to restore or demolish the estate has ended in failure acts, fires, unexplained illnesses. The land seems to resist closure, as if the story itself refuses to end. And so, the questions remain, echoing through the empty halls and overgrown gardens. What really happened to Clara Whitby? What did Percival Ashford unleash in his quest for answers? Was the curse real, or simply the shadow cast by human frailty? Now, I turn the mystery over to you. Which theory do you find most convincing? Do you believe in the supernatural, or do you see only the tragic consequences of ambition and secrecy? Or perhaps you have your own theory, waiting to be shared. Let your thoughts linger in the comments below. Every legend needs new voices to keep it alive. Thank you for venturing with me into the shadows of Ashford Manor, where every echo is a question and every silence hides a secret. We've traced the rise and fall of a family whose ambition and fear left scars not just on their own bloodline, but on an entire community. We've witnessed the chilling disappearance of Clara Whitby, the descent into madness and cruelty, the forbidden experiments that blurred the line between science and sorcery, and the night when the red moon rose, and the Ashford legacy was shattered forever. But as we leave the manor's crumbling halls behind, the question remains, was the Ashford curse a supernatural force, or the tragic result of human frailty and obsession? Are the whispers in the walls the voices of the damned, or simply the echoes of guilt and grief? The truth, as always, is elusive, caught somewhere between fact and folklore, history and nightmare. If you've made it this far, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe the Ashfords were cursed, or were they architects of their own destruction? Which theory haunts you the most? Share your ideas and your own family legends in the comments below. After all, every story grows darker and richer when we tell it together. And if you're hungry for more tales of haunted bloodlines, forbidden knowledge, and the secrets that refuse to die, make sure